pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having us. I'll just start by introducing myself, although that was such a lovely introduction, so kind. My name is Alyssa Nadworny. I'm a correspondent at NPR, and I started covering education, and I'm covering education now. It is where my heart is. Families, young people, I think are just like everything is connected to education. Every issue that you could be interested in, for me, always comes back to education. But I have done some reporting abroad. I've been to Ukraine 4 times since the invasion in 2022. I've been to Israel to cover the conflict with Hamas and Gaza. And that said, I'm back in education, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm happy to be doing this conversation. I first did a story about student parents almost a decade ago. I was on campus at the University of Florida doing a story about first-generation college students, and I met a young woman named Ikea Parks, and she had a 3-year-old. And I was so struck by her determination and enthusiasm, and I called my editor and I said, I've got to stay and do a profile of Ikea. She is in her final semester in college, and I've got to tell her story. And so I stayed for 3 more days in Gainesville, and we put a 6-minute feature just about Ikea and her son and her graduation on All Things Considered. And I would say it was kind of a turning point in my understanding of who goes to college and kind of what services are essential at colleges. And it kind of started my journey in covering student parents and ultimately connected me with Generation Hope. And we've done many collaborative stories since then. One thing I just wanted to say in terms of coverage is I think I started doing stories about student parents. And now when I cover education, I like to use student parents as voices in stories about education. So the story isn't about student parents, but they're at the table about lots of other things. And so that's been a really big shift for me in kind of thinking about how to include these voices in coverage when it's like, it doesn't have to be the story. So that's a lot about me. Now you guys get to talk for the most part.
Well, you're going to start with there, right?
We'll start at the end with Monica. So I'd love if you could just introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and then give us a little primer on what you're working on and kind of what interests you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Ramos. I am a researcher at Child Trends, a nonprofit organization. I am working on a few different projects, and one of my favorite ones is a project that's just starting called Black Families Flourishing. We're creating a survey that is focused on highlighting the diversity among Black families and the strengths as well. And then we're going to field the survey across the United States to create a database. So we're at the very beginning of a 10-year journey for that project.
And how did you get into this work? Give us your origin story.
Sure. I come from a really big family. I'm one of 8, and it's very big and very diverse. I've always been interested in what makes families flourish. And when I went to school, I noticed that all the literature on families that look like me, Hispanic and Black families, were very deficiency-based. And so I decided that if somebody was going to tell the story, that it might as well be me.
And then how did you get into Child Trends, and kind of what has been some of your research objectives?
Sure. I started at Child Trends as an intern. I'm one of those people that stays forever. I'm like 15 years now at Child Trends. I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Just tell us a little bit about kind of how your interests have like changed over time and where you started. And
Yeah, sure. So my dissertation was focused on recent immigrant families, Latina ones. What I did was I looked at family engagement. I compared a survey of what families were supposed to do in school, and then actually had a conversation with those families. And I was able to show that the surveys weren't actually picking up what the families were doing. And I was able to tie those behaviors back to cultural values and beliefs to show that how we think about families and what families do and why they do it to support their children needs to be expanded.
Why wasn't it showing up on the survey?
The survey was primarily focused on what middle-income white families do. There was a lack of people who were working on developing the surveys to be reflective of the people who were using them.
Which is like kind of a wild thing, because you just started to say the thing you're working on now is developing the survey.
Like
it's like so around. Yeah. That's incredible. Fatima, can you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with all of you. I'm Fatima Goss-Graves. I'm the president and CEO at the National Women's Law Center, where I've been for a very long time. And we fight for gender justice. We do it in the courts. We do it by trying to pass public policies at the federal and state levels. And we do it by engaging in public education campaigns where people get their information. And so sometimes that's places like TikTok, where a lot of young people get more information. I say that it clearly distinguishing from my own self.
You're not on TikTok all the time?
I'm not really, but folks at the National Women's Law Center are, and they do a very good job on it.
Amazing. One of the kind of detours from education that I took was covering reproductive rights for the last year through the election. So we relied on a lot of your work and reports that came out of that center.
Fantastic.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you came to this work. What is your origin story?
I'm a lawyer. I'm actually the first lawyer in my family, and
Yeah, give it to her.
but so it's actually funny because I went to law school thinking I really understood what the law is, because both of my parents' families were plaintiffs in school desegregation cases. So when I thought about the law, and even today when I think about the law, I think about the really brave people who are behind the cases that we bring. Their willingness to take on systems, to say something isn't right, to challenge the usual ways of doing business, and to challenge oftentimes government, and when you think government isn't showing up for you. And I'll just say that, the Law Center works across the lives of women and girls, including in terms of access to education. And so my connection to young parents really probably started when I was an attorney early in my career there as a counsel working on Title IX and representing a student who was at a college in New York, and her school would not allow her to take any time off. And so after she had her baby, she had to come back right away because every day of class she missed, she got a 0,
Wow.
which is illegal under Title IX. And the level of fighting we had to do to get the school in real time to understand that, change the policies, and make it right for her. And then the Department of Education to issue guidance reminding every school was an early project in my career that always will stick with me.
How long ago was that, and have things changed?
So that was about a decade ago.
Yeah,
and I was like, what year was that? And during the Obama administration, the Department of Education put out a reminder and guidance that was not okay. But we still hear about violations all the time, where schools will leave it up to a particular teacher or a particular professor as to whether or not students are able to get the time off that they're entitled to under the law to recover from pregnancy.
The fight continues.
Wow. All right, Tate.
Oh, it's my time.
It's now your turn. Yeah.
After these amazing young ladies? Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, so what's the question?
So introduce yourself and tell us what you do now, and then we can get into your origin story.
Okay, well, I'm Ferrari Tate. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship at the Greater Washington Urban League. I'm also the founder of Inspired DMV Hospitality, which is a digital platform to elevate young people who are interested in entrepreneurship.
And what brings you here to this conference today, and kind of how did you become part of this world?
Yes, well, as a father at the Greater Washington Urban League, we jumped into the fight. We understood that Black fathers who are dealing with child support often are fighting themselves. And so we developed a program, the Black Fatherhood Blueprint. This project helps men who are wanting or desiring to be at home, be with their children, who may need a little support with child support, so we help them with that. But we built a community at the Greater Washington Urban League to support these men, to make sure that they have the support to stay with their children and keep the family together. So we have processes that bring both parents back together to make sure we're nurturing the child through this process of learning to be the best parents. So being a part of this is
Yeah.
why I'm here.
Can you tell us a little bit about
Thank
why?
you. We have to support our men as we trying our best to be best fathers. And I'm a father too also.
Yeah, I was going to ask kind of like, what's your story?
Yes.
Share a little bit?
Yeah, as a father of two, I'm transitioning my wife. At the time, we decided to separate, but we also decided to stay connected to make sure our children had the infrastructure that they needed also to be good young people growing up. And so I bring that experience that with the loneliness of trying to make sure that the bills were paid, that the law was processed correctly, because imagine trying to deal with a court system without having real infrastructure, understanding my rights and her rights and the child's rights. So all of these things were important to provide a blueprint for. So when the Greater Washington Urban League decided, I'm like, look, let me help. Let me be a part of this.
I love it. Okay, we'll get back to you in just a
All right,
second.
no problem.
I want to talk about the moment that we're in right now. I'm covering federal higher ed policy, and I have been on Morning Edition almost every day for the last 3 weeks. There is a lot of change. There is a lot of policy change. I wonder if you could talk about what you're watching, what's happening, how do we keep up with it all, and then we can kind of dissect that.
Well, I wonder across the room how many people may have felt overwhelmed trying to keep up with what's been happening.
Yes, look at those hands.
I mean, right, including reporters. That is actually the point. I just want to say that that Stephen Bannon was pretty clear that there is a strategy to flood the zone, to overwhelm the media in particular, but everyone with so much information that it's impossible to figure out even where do you begin.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're experiencing right now. But because I still try to categorize things, I'm going to give you some categories to think about. One of the things that was a right-of-way action that I will just confess, as someone who's been doing this work and did a lot of planning to ready for this administration, including planning against the Project 2025 agenda, I think the thing that I was unprepared for was the way that DOGE, the sort of Elon Musk part of the led part of the government, has operated. And that's meant two things have shifted, even if you studied Project 2025. One, there is a mandate to do dramatic cuts across the federal government, which has resulted in many civil servants being terminated, and has also resulted in many programs that support families in this country being terminated without notice. So people went into 2025 believing that a particular project or program was going to exist, and now it may not exist as of today, or they're sort of walking around eggshells and planning very differently. So that deliberate effort to shrink the federal footprint is a mandate that has been happening at a pace that we've never seen in history. So that's one thing that's happening. So just to give you an example, HHS, Health and Human Services, which is an agency, did a round of cuts last week, and all of a sudden our phones were ringing off the hook from Head Start providers who were saying that their regional offices have been closed. They don't know who to call. Someone's supposed to go to a site visit. No one is doing site visits anymore. It is chaotic. So that's one category and way to think about things, that deliberate shrinking of the federal footprint. A second category and way to think about things is a series of executive actions that have been targeting three categories. One is a series of executive actions against diversity, equity, and inclusion. I will just get to the punchline that their understanding and naming of diversity, equity, inclusion is far broader than I think any layman's understanding of it. So the National Women's Law Center has filed a lawsuit, for example, against an organization called against the government representing Chicago Women in Trades, which provides harassment training and job training for women in construction. That is the sort of thing that was paused because of DEI. So just to give you a picture, there's a category of anti-trans executive orders, things that are done in the name of defending women. That's in the title of the executive order, and it's been across the federal government. There's a category of anti-immigrant executive orders and an increase in enforcement. And all of that on its own would be a lot. But the biggest thing that happened, and if you were paying close attention to the news today, is that Congress is moving forward with a really significant tax bill that is designed to give trillions of dollars in tax cuts to the highest earners, to billionaires and corporations in this country. And in order to pay for that, they have to find savings in over $1 trillion. And there's no way to do that by looking for waste or fraud in the federal workforce. That number doesn't add up. So what is on the table are really big cuts to things like Medicaid or food assistance or other significant programs that support families. So in terms of our time, we are heavily focused there at the National Women's Law Center on this really big conversation about the budget. And anytime that conversation isn't going so well in Washington, I have noticed that we see an extra conversation around DEI, trans folks, or immigrants. And so holding those two things, the sort of upending of how we support families in this country with a lot of scapegoating of vulnerable communities is what's happening right now.
Wow, well, we will bring some joy to the end of this conversation, I promise.
Was that hard to hear? Everyone could breathe.
It's the truth.
It's helpful to know because it is true that there's so much going on that you could miss it. And I think especially with kind of some of these smaller programs having their grants stopped, you don't hear about it for weeks even because they might not know exactly what's happening. And so it's really hard to track.
That's right.
Hey, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the fatherhood experience. I think sometimes fatherhood can be kind of shuffled to the side in the conversation around student parents.
Yes. Well, by a show of hands, how many people out here can say that they have experienced the separation process, meaning